Hi, everyone. Reinette Senum here with Reinette Senum's foghornexpress.substack.com. Jim Lee is joining me again, ClimateViewer.com or .org, weathermodificationhistory.com as well. We had a fabulous conversation a few weeks back, and he is an expert in his own right on geoengineering and the history of geoengineering and anything you have a question about geoengineering. He knows really some of the most information I can attest to that anyone I know. And so he's going to come back, and we're just going to wing it. And I'm going to be kind of shooting from the hip, asking him some questions, some clarifying questions from our last interview as well. So without further ado, Mr. Jim Lee, thank you so much for joining us a second time.
Glad to be back. Means I must not have offended you too much last time.
No, you definitely did not. It takes a lot. I used to commercial fish up in Alaskan Gulf. It takes a lot to offend me.
I was a prison guard. I'm, literally bulletproof when it comes to words.
Well, there you go. It takes two. So yeah, it's good. It's good to rumble with you. So yeah. And I just want to say thank you so much for our part one interview. It was very well received, got lots of views, lots of comments. And, it's interesting because it gave me a lot of information. And so there's a few things I want to talk about that was not completely clear with me. And I'm going to start with this here is we were talking about jet fuel. And we're talking about different geoengineering programs and all of the heavy metals in the air and the water and our rain and our snow samples. And one of the things you mentioned is that these heavy metals are in the jet fuel and how jet fuel has changed over the years. And I just want to clarify, make sure that I've got this right. So has commercial airliners, have the military aircraft, have they always been kerosene-based jet fuels, or were they gasoline at one time and there's a change? And now it is kerosene-based, but with the biofuels as well. Like, where did the transition happen where it's all these heavy metals in the fuel now? That's where I'm trying to grapple with. Is like, where did that happen?
So the biggest change in jet fuel came with what was called the NATO single fuel concept.
Okay.
Or what they call one fuel for the battlefield.
Gotcha.
And the idea was that, the military had various, JP1 through like 5, 6, 7, many different types of fuels. The United States Navy still operates on a different type of fuel than all of the rest, but they came to this JP8 or,
right.
Jet fuel, that's basically a kerosene base.
Right.
And the big difference between it and other fuels is that it's lower down the totem pole than gasoline. So like as you're refining fuel, you're getting impurities out.
Mm-hmm.
Down at the very bottom, in the turning crude oil into some usable fuel.
Right.
You've got the stuff that they make roads out of, like the tar, and and the stuff that they make, your roof
right.
out of.
Like tar sands would be good for your road and for your roof, right? But not
right. And then you come up above that, you have like heavy fuel oil, right. And then you get to the paraffins, which is the kerosenes and diesels. And then you get to gasoline above that, and then you get to almost like pure like an actual gas. Right. So as you climb up that spectrum, you're filtering out impurities. So kerosene and diesel, they sit kind of in the middle. Now, one of the reasons that they did this, obviously during Vietnam, they were operating a lot of gasoline-based fuels. And the Viet Cong were able to basically fire an AK-47 at an RF-4 Phantom. And because of the low flash point of gasoline, it would cause the planes to explode.
Gotcha.
Similarly, whenever people would go to refuel the planes, just the static, electricity, and you've seen this at any gas pump. It says turn off your cell phones, turn off your vehicle, because if static jumps from a jet fuel hose to the plane, boom, you have blown up plane, dead people. Right. That's bad. And then similarly, the biggest reason they did this was for dollars, because in having these specified fuels that were military only, it made it harder for what they call the NATO Oil Pipeline Committee to, basically roll out fuels and keep it cost effective. So they wanted this idea of a single fuel for the battlefield, or one fuel for the battlefield, the single fuel concept. The idea that was to put JP8 not only in planes, but also the U.S. Army would use it as well for their tanks, their Humvees, their Jeeps, that sort of stuff. And their helicopters, Chinooks, Apaches, Cobras, all of the things. And by buying in bulk, they would be able to save money. The interesting part, though, is when you look at the comparison of, say, JP5 to JP8, you have 5,000 parts per billion of aluminum, or no, 2,500 parts per billion of aluminum in the exhaust coming out. So as it's been burned, JP8, 5,000 parts per billion, double.
Wow.
So then you go to calcium. Now, most people don't even think about calcium. It's not even part of the chemtrail discussion or geoengineering discussion. It's actually one of the leading proposed chemicals to be used in geoengineering. Calcium jumped from right about 8,000 parts per billion in JP5 to 32,000 parts per billion.
Okay, so what's the reason for calcium to be in this?
There was a lot of talk originally. The original discussion around geoengineering originates at Lawrence Livermore National Lab with Edward Teller, Roderick Hyde, and Lowell Wood. Lowell Wood is also known as Dr. Evil, for those who aren't familiar with the guy. Look him up. Can Dr. Evil save us from global warming? It's on ClimateViewer.com, the entire thing. It was originally written by Jeff Goodall. It was on Rolling Stone magazine. Then he made good with the geoengineers. They took the article down, so I put it back up. And then years later, they decided to kind of rejigger the words and then put it back up on Rolling Stone. But regardless, it tells the tale of this. And there were 3 prominent papers that came out of that. And originally, the very first discussion was about sulfur. So the idea that you're mimicking volcanoes, that if you put sulfur into the sky, you create sulfur dioxide, sulfuric acid, that's what volcanoes do. That's what Mount Pinatubo did in 1991, and that cooled the planet. So these geniuses at Lawrence Livermore were like, well, to save us from global warming, we could mimic volcanoes by spraying sulfur in the atmosphere. Along comes Ken Caldera in the second paper that they released, and a group of other people. And they had them do computer models, simulations of what the future would look like in a geoengineered world. And after that paper, the final paper switches to aluminum as the primary, what we would like to spray in the sky. Now, simultaneously, all of these have been discussed. David Keith, I believe, was the first that I know of to come along with the idea of using calcium because it has a lower mortality rate, that it has different properties, but still has a high albedo, meaning reflectivity. They've talked about titanium dioxide. They've even discussed John Neeson from the Arctic Methane Emergency Group using diamond dust, or compressing atmospheric methane using HARP and radars like HARP to literally compress it. So when you think about all of the different metals and the sulfur, and then you go back and you say, well, all of these are in the jet fuel exhaust. And we previously covered how many flights there are.
Right.
Do you really need to change? If you had to narrow it down to a single boogeyman and say 1996, according to Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, and all the other little tags they put underneath your YouTube video, if you say the word chemtrail, it's got a contrail thing on there, and it says, these are all, contrails. They're not chemtrails. They try to debunk it. But what even the debunkers agree upon is that this conspiracy started in 1996 to 1997. They blame the Air Force paper owning the weather in 2025. But in my research, what I've come to realize is I went through Google, and you can actually put in years, and you can go back in time, and you can see exactly when the first time the word chemtrail was ever put on the internet. And I read the very first article of the first person who ever wrote an article about chemtrails. And guess what it was about?
What?
JP8 jet fuel. So we've come a long way since then. So I'm going to, circle back to that NATO single fuel concept. In 1988, the military decided, well, all the NATO countries need to have a single unified fuel so that we can buy it in bulk and save money, so that it's available in all the different theaters of war, and it's going to be JP8. And in the case of like higher flying planes, spy planes, high altitude bombers, we're going to put an additive in it called a +100 additive, or a HITS additive. It's called a high thermal stability additive. It's a triple cocktail of, a detergent, static dissipators required in all of them, a de-icing agent. And anyway, so they basically made a triple cocktail of additives to put in JP8s specifically for high altitude flights. But this transition happened from 1988 and was completed in 1996.
Okay.
In 1997 was when we saw a marked increase worldwide in cloud cover created by planes. And of course, all in the early days, everybody was talking about the military planes.
Right.
And it's not a coincidence that this single fuel concept, the switch from, gasoline-based fuels to kerosene-based fuels, caused this coking problem. Soot is a major factor in creating cloud cover. And my father-in-law, stepfather, my parents separated when I was 2 years old. But she married another Air Force guy, and he stayed in 30 years and was a chief master sergeant at Offutt Air Force Base. And it turns out his specialty was fuel systems. So after I came to this conclusion, after I did all this research, I said, wait a minute, I think I'm onto something here. I called him up and I said, hey, Sam, I got a question for you. Do you remember when y'all switched to JP8? And he immediately goes,
Sounds like my dad.
Yeah. And I said, Did you notice any kind of difference in, performance? What was the deal there? He says, Jim, let me put it to you like this. On a KC-135 or a E3 AWACS, it literally destroyed the engines. They were coated in black soot so thick that we had to redesign the combustors. We had to change out fuel lines. We had all kinds of problems changing over. So if you realize that I've got firsthand, hands on the ground, he's been working on these planes and confirming what I've come to the conclusion that this changeover not only drastically increased atmospheric nanoparticles of metals, it increased soot production. Soot, and also known as carbon black carbon, depends on who you talk to, is a perfect cloud seed. So now you have the perfect cloud seed coming out of 40 countries simultaneously. Right. And this allows for water to stick to it. And now suddenly the contrails that were disappearing before are spreading out in milky white haze. So That's the story of the NATO single fuel concept. And from that, I've looked deeper and deeper into jet fuel, interviewed the head of the Federal Aviation Administration Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative, read Dr. Ulrich Schumann, who's from Germany's DLR. He's like, that's their NASA, who said, we want more cooling, less warming contrails predictable for operational planning. Dr. Rangasai Halthori from the FAA, he said, we want more contrail-induced cirrus clouds by day, none by night. So it's not like they don't recognize that there is geoengineering occurring. They want to take advantage of a system that's already in place. We already have planes making clouds,
Right.
blocking sunlight. The problem is they trap heat at night.
Right.
So if you Google right now, IATA targets non-CO2 emissions from airlines, you'll realize that what I said in 2015 to the EPA when I testified in Washington, D.C., that clouds are a greater climate forcer than all of the greenhouse gas emissions, period. Right. And that's why now they're under the gun, because carbon taxes, because carbon credits, because they got to be net zero. They can't, as long as their clouds they're creating and the ice haze from the nanoparticles, the whitening of the sky, the milky white sky you're seeing, that is ice nucleating particles, not just cloud condensation nuclei. Right. So these ice nucleating particles are making the sky whiter. Right. That is geoengineering. Mm. When Lowell, Roger Hyde, and Edward Teller, and Ken Caldera and David Keith and all of these geoengineers, when they talk about geoengineering, they're never talking about clouds in the troposphere. They're talking about whitening the sky in the stratosphere. Mm-hmm. So this is the big disconnect between the chemtrail community, the other websites named geoengineering that watch the sky. They don't recognize that all of this time throughout the beginning, middle, and end of the discussion for geoengineering, it's been about lofting chemicals into the stratosphere to whiten the sky, not to create clouds. That's the big disconnect.
Okay, so question for you. Was this something that they discovered inadvertently, or do they add these heavy metals and so on, this concoction, to do exactly what it's doing? And then they just inadvertently discovered it and like, hey, let's take advantage of this. Let's do this and let's actually increase it. So which came first? Or
it's one of those, this is the $1 million question, because the NATO Pipeline Committee, if you're going to pick a group of dudes in black hoods looking like the Illuminati, deciding they were going to geoengineer the planet, these are the only people that I can think of in 15 years who could actually do it.
Well, when I tell people, because since we had our conversation, I've been going out and speaking to different people, speaking before groups. I'm saying, hey, because when I uncover something, I want to share it with people, right? I'm learning as I'm going as well. And when I'm learning, I'm trying to say, hey, folks, this is what I've learned. This is a massive learning curve. And it's total disclosure for me. And I'm not attached to a certain ideology, or it's got to be this. It's like, when I get new information, I will absorb it and go, oh, okay, I will adjust accordingly. So my interview with you was like a game changer. So when I tell people, because people are saying, well, who's in charge of the jet fuel? I'm like, well, looks like NATO, no problem here. And people are like, NATO? I'm like, I know, right? This is actually not a comforting thought whatsoever. So in order to change this JP8 jet fuel, who would we have to go before? Would it be NATO? Would it be Congress? Would it be the U.S. president?
So this is kind of a twofer. So there's also what are called ASTM standards. So that's the American Society for Testing and Materials. So the ASTM has standards for jet fuel. So like Jet A which is primary, almost exclusively used in commercial American flights.
Right.
Then there's Jet A1, which is available almost worldwide. Today, the military is actually shifting away from JP8 jet fuel. Again, because they want to keep it cheap and available for wartime. So they're making a shift to Jet A1, but they're requiring that certain additives be put in the fuel. So again, they have higher quality, stringent, they're called STANAGs. They're these military agreements. They have these military standards. So like F-34, F-44, we call it, JP5, JP8. The JP, I believe it's JP8 plus 100 is F-44. So you have the military standards, which are set by NATO, which are used by all NATO countries and all NATO militaries. Then you have the commercial side, where now the military is starting to adopt the ASTM standards, but with their own special additives. So regardless of, whether it comes from NATO, whether it comes from the ASTM, which is, a whole nother ball of wax, pardon the paraffin joke. Side note, paraffins, kerosene is a paraffin oil, and paraffins are wax, and wax is what they use in staged smoke. So is it ironic that we're all talking about smoke in the sky when they're running on kerosene, which is a paraffin oil? I'm just saying. But anyway, we'll just throw that one out. Stupid science humor, I guess.
No, it's good science humor. So okay, so the Jet A1 that they're moving into, is that worse than what we have right now?
I'm not exactly certain on that, but what I can say for certain is, and I said I wasn't going to share screens, but you know what? I'm going to try it anyway, because this one's worth it. I'm assuming this is hiding on my monitor. I cut off. There it is. And I'll bring this picture up real quick just so you can see it. Images, infographics, and that. Okay, so let me bring that over here and we'll make full screen, and then I'll share that real quick. Okay, so these are the facts. Let's see. Is it present? Yeah. Share screen. Window. Tire screen. There we go.
All right. Here we go.
Where'd it go? It went there.
All
right, there you go.
There we go.
So if you look at metals detected in jet exhaust, everything in red are the metals.
Right.
So sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium, scandium, titanium, vanadium, chromium, manganese, iron, cobalt, nickel, copper, strontium, barium, zirconium, niobium, molybdenum, aluminum, silicone, tin, lead, and I included sulfur and selenium over here. But these are all from scientific peer-reviewed journals, studies done in situ, which means on site, which means in the air behind planes, from straight from the military and from 3 different university sources. And I combined these together to come up and make this beautiful infographic for you, because I'm a graphics artist. And I figured the best way to illustrate this is obviously with, a graphic. And as you can see here, these are all transition metals. These are alkaline earth metals. Calcium is an alkaline earth metal, strontium and barium. Okay? And these are alkali metals, sodium, potassium. Way over here, you've got, other transition metals and other metals. Aluminum, the silicone, is a metalloid, but these are all metals. All of these are metals.
My question is this: why do we need any aluminum? Why do we need any of these metals in the jet fuel?
So the reality of it is that crude oil is filled with this naturally.
Okay, so it has not been extracted.
Right. So because when they're doing the refining process,
Right.
they're not removing all of these metals. And then when they're burned, they go through chemical changes, obviously. But also because they're metals and because of the friction and all of the weird things, there's other processes in there. They're called chemi-ions, really weird words, Chemi Chemiions, chemi-ions. If you dig deep into this rabbit hole, what you're going to realize is the jet engines are perfect cloud makers. And because of the prominence of soot and these nanoparticles of metal, which are embedded in the soot, and the fact that the sulfur becomes sulfur dioxide and sulfuric acid, the soot becomes coated in sulfuric acid. And the Indian Space Organization found 18 kilometers in the sky, 10,000 soot particles per square centimeter.
Oh,
This, and they said, and this is straight from the Indian Space Organization, the only source possible for that black carbon that they found at 18 kilometers was the airline industry. So you look at it from that perspective and you go, if you're flying near the tropopause, so we live here in the troposphere, the stratosphere is here, the ozone layer is in between, and planes typically fly right here or just below it. Some of them fly above it, and the tropopause can be in different locations on different parts of the earth. It's typically around 49,000 feet. But different parts of the earth, it could be 10,000 feet lower or higher. So what's happening is as these planes are flying around, especially international flights, which tend to fly higher, they're depositing tons and tons and tons of sulfur. David Key said, if I were to do what I would want to do with a geoengineering program, I'd put about 1 million tons of sulfur into the stratosphere. And that would kill many tens of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
They've been doing that for, the better part of 60 years, 60, 80 years. So you start to think about it this way, that with the ever increasing demand for flight, with the ever higher flying, longer flying flights, with the refinement of fuels, and now the talk of adding ground up nanoparticles of aluminum directly to the jet fuel to increase fuel performance. So it's no different than your motor head going out there and putting, some octane enhancer in his fuel tank. You've seen it.
Yeah.
It's the same idea. And now we have these federal alternative aviation fuels or biofuels, and they range all over the board. We're actually now going into the 4th generation of biofuels for manned flight, for commercial and military flights. And these biofuels, they range from what's called the Fischer-Tropsch process to HEFA, HEFA, fatty acid methyl ester, FAME. FAME is like literally when you take recycled chicken fat grease or the grease from McDonald's and turn that into jet fuel.
Oh, for
Fischer-Tropsch is literally like going to the landfill and turning landfill waste into jet fuel.
Is there any, once that stuff is up there in the stratosphere, is there any way of getting it out of there, or it's just trapped?
So the higher you loft a chemical, the longer its residence time. This is the problem why we see the buildup of this milky white haze. If you were to say, put the exact same amount of chemicals at 30,000 feet, and then you went up into the exact, to the milligram, the exact same amount of chemicals at 60,000 feet, 30,000 feet is going to rain out in about 2 weeks to 2 months. In the stratosphere, it's going to hang out for 1 to 4 years.
So it's cumulative. So the more they do this, the more it's just going to get milkier and milkier. And it was interesting because I was down in the area by Yosemite a few weeks ago, and I was actually shocked. And it was very dark. No city lights, no urban lights. I was shocked by how few stars I could see. What comparable to what I saw as a child. Right. And I'm looking up going, there's no city lights here. It should be like we should be just thousands. And it was like, no, I'm actually not seeing a lot of stars. So I assume that's just going to get worse and worse, of course.
Of course. And that's another reason why, they've put forward all of these crazy ideas to, try to control the contrails while not focusing on the ice haze. So Chuck Long, he's dead now. This was in like 2017, I want to say. Chuck Long came out with a paper and he said, are we already conducting geoengineering? And he said that planes are creating a subvisual ice haze, which is whitening the sky. And this is where the disconnect happens between the chemtrail community, the people who hate geoengineering because we're geoengineering everything. They don't see. It's like Bruce Lee said, it's like a finger pointing the way to the moon. Don't focus on the finger or you'll miss that heavenly glory. Mm-hmm. Everybody's so focused on the fingers coming out of the back of planes. Mm-hmm. They don't even see the white haze. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, don't get me wrong. I hate the weather modification and geoengineering aspects of chemtrails, contrails, plane farts, contrail-induced cirrus, aviation-induced cloudiness. Choose your terminology. Right. It's all the same thing. I call them artificial clouds because right. It's the most simplest term. Right. Man-made clouds. Man-made clouds, bad. I don't like it. I want sunny days. I want my children to be able to see the stars. But if we don't focus on both simultaneously, the fact that planes are dumping chemicals, what's unique about the airline industry is where it right. puts its pollution. That's the takeaway I want everybody to understand about geoengineering and planes. There's no other industry that can dump its pollution in the stratosphere.
Right. Right.
So that's why we have this major problem. And then when you have, Dr. Hal Thorey, he's from the Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative, saying we want more clouds by day because they cool during the day and none by night. I'll share this other beautiful graphic I made. Now that I got this thing figured out, I can do it quicker.
Okay. This
is what we call solar radiation management versus Earth radiation management. Mm. And their newest idea, and this was even mentioned in Biden's geoengineering proposal, that we're focusing on solar radiation modification, which has been called solar radiation management for the past 15, 20 years. They just up and changed it. But regardless, SRM blocks incoming solar radiation. It reflects it back to space to make things reflective, to put them back into space. But the problem is, at night, the heat that reaches the ground cannot go back to space. Right. Why? Because there's this protective layer, the actual greenhouse that's created by planes. That's why they're saying we want none by night. Mm-hmm. That's why he's saying we want less warming, more cooling contrails. Mm-hmm. In fact, they've come up with this idea called cirrus cloud seeding or cirrus cloud thinning. So while calling you a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy, theorist, these are the kinds of things they're saying behind your back about the exact same thing you're pointing at and complaining about. Let me clear my throat for this one. This one's long. If the time and place of seeding is selected with care, the climate effect of cirrus thinning can be enhanced. For that, only the long wave warming effect of cirrus clouds should be targeted, and their solar effect should be avoided. This can be achieved if seeding is limited to high latitude winters or to nighttime seeding. What they're saying is
Wow.
they're all saying the same thing. More clouds by day, none by night. Cirrus cloud seeding or cirrus cloud thinning. High latitude winters near the North Pole, or nighttime seeding to melt them away at night so heat can escape back to space. This is dubbed Earth Radiation Management, ERM.
Right.
You hear everybody talk about SRM. Nobody even knows that ERM is a thing.
No.
It is mentioned in the Biden Geoengineering Research Report. Cirrus cloud thinning has been around for quite some time as a discussion, as early as 2012, 2015. Trude Storyelmo went to the weather modification conference, and she posited this idea of using bismuth triiodide to melt the clouds away. And she even in one of her slides said, use the commercial, aviation as the dispenser.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is where, conspiracy meets reality.
Right.
That on the one hand, it clearly has been pollution. The earliest, newspaper articles that we have on this go back to 1958, of Palm Springs saying our skies have been blocked out, and the Air Force saying, you live in a highway and you live under a highway in the sky, get over it.
Yeah.
But at that point, I would be willing to say, of course, it was pollution. And it's been pollution for a very long time. And scientists, whether they were just ignorant at the time, or they're, slowly picking up the pieces. 9/11 was the big aha moment. And I think we talked about this briefly in the last, interview.
Right.
But when 9/11 occurred and they grounded all flights, Patrick Minnis and David Travis, noticed that the temperature between the day and the night widened rapidly. They call it the diurnal temperature range. This was the aha moment. So in 2001 was the first time we didn't have a bunch of flights everywhere. And the only flights in the air was Air Force One and two F-16s, F-15s, flying alongside of it. And they did a study and they said, no, this can't be true. Everybody's like, those two freaks from Langley Research Center, screw them. What do they know? Then it happened again in 2008 with the Iceland volcano. And they grounded all the flights over Europe. And an E3 AWACS by itself, an AWACS is a flying radar. If anybody's never seen one, it's a KC-135 with a big radar dish on top of it. It was doing circles over the UK, and that plane by itself, combined with the fact that there was all the volcanic ash in the air, so I will give that caveat, it was able to cover almost the entire United Kingdom in clouds by itself. One plane.
Wow.
And this led Olivier Boucher, who's from the IPCC, to say a plane operating in favorable conditions seems to exert a radiative forcing 5,000 times greater than all of the greenhouse gases emitted since the start of flight.
So when we're talking about climate change and we're talking about greenhouse gases, right? Once again, obviously you got to stop blaming the cows.
Right. It's like
there's nothing, there's no comparison.
There's zero comparison.
Yeah.
When you take into the fact that they make the argument that because CO2 warms up, that increases water vapor and that heats the planet. This is fundamentally flawed because of something called entropy. And I won't get too sciencey on you, but basically Earth is not a closed system. So if Earth was a closed system, then it could heat up and heat up and heat up and heat up indefinitely till, finally we all die, like everybody talks about with their, climate cultism. However, the greenhouse is actually the ice haze and the clouds made by planes.
Damn.
You don't have a greenhouse unless you've got plastic or glass. Okay. You can't make a sunroom or a greenhouse unless you have some kind of transparent medium for sunlight to come in and heat that closed, entrapped area. This is what the greenhouse actually is. This is what they've come to realize. So now that's why I said earlier about the IATA targeting non-CO2 emissions from aviation, because they've come to realize in the last 30, 40 years, and I've got NBC News, ABC News, all of these, prominent broadcasts, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And what they thought then versus what they know now is readily apparent. They know now that they are the ones screwing up the entire planet, and that the airline industry will go broke if they can't fix this before all of you people figure it out.
Right. So that's so this is revolutionary. So basically, they now realize they're essentially causing the greenhouse gases, and yet they're still selling us the whole climate change scenario. It's the cows, it's you, it's your, your cars. We've got to put you into 15-minute cities. We've got to carbon tax you. And it's not that. It's the,
no, it's not that. Right. CO2 is plant food.
Right. Exactly.
Without, if we net zero would, have extreme detrimental effects on the climate. It does not affect weather. Okay. Judith Curry was the initiator of the idea that maybe, warming of the planet and CO2 had something to do with hurricanes. And since then, she's become one of the most vocal advocates of, these guys are fake. And she does climate assessments for businesses. And instead of feeding them one or two BS computer models that says, the seas are going to rise, everything's going to die, she said on average, when a company comes to her for an environmental impact statement and a future climate model, she gives them between like 70 to 80 scenarios.
Well, that's the thing is that when you, like, for instance, we'll get this momentarily, but Mexico banned experimental geoengineering, and that was make sunsets. But I'm like, it's all experimental. Nobody can forecast geoengineering. It's purely Russian roulette.
So I applaud, your Indiana's paper for recognizing the solar geoengineering non-use agreement.
Right.
And, I've been in contact with them and the ETC group. I'm not sure if you've heard about the Hands Off Mother Earth manifesto. Hands Off Mother Earth is home. Anyway, so this is geoengineeringmonitor.org. And it's the ETC group that's head of it, along with Biofuels Watch and Heinrich Bowles from Germany. Anyway, so they came up with this thing called the Hands Off Mother Earth Manifesto, a global ban on geoengineering. For the record, the only people on the planet who have stopped geoengineering experiments is the ETC group.
Wow.
And that's Jim Thomas, Sylvia Ribeiro, and Pat Mooney, who I've been in contact with. I worked with them on their first World of Geoengineering map, turning that into a Google Fusion table and then into a Google Earth map. These guys stopped the SPICE project in the UK. I think 2012, I want to say 2010-ish, stratospheric particle injection for climate engineering. They also stopped David Keith, not once, not twice, but thrice. Right. David Keith wanted to do SCOPEX, the stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment, with his Strato Cruiser, which was a rebranding of the Strato Shield, which was an idea put forth by Intellectual Ventures, Nathan Myhrvold and Bill Gates. So they rebranded that. And the idea was to float a balloon, put a bunch of instruments on what looks like a satellite, effectively, and spray a bunch of chemicals, take a whole bunch of measurements. And they were going to do this in Tucson, Arizona. Then they got canceled there. Then they were going to do it one other place. And then finally they were going to do it in Sweden. And ETC group and Hands Off Mother Earth petitioned the local Swedish government, and they said, you know what? You can't launch your balloon here. So it's been indefinitely on hold since. Then you have Luke Eisman, Jackass of the Year, comes along and fills out
Make sunsets. Yeah.
Yeah. So Luke Eisman comes along and fills out a NOAA Form 17-4.
And can we just say, this guy is not a meteorologist, he's not an environmentalist, he's not a geoengineer, he's some guy from San Francisco.
He is a derp. He does not understand anything about what he's doing. Now, on the one hand, you got to give him credit. I mean, like, I'm going to be real with you. Like, I'm going to tell you what he did, and then I'm going to tell you it. I've thought about doing what he did just to troll, just to see what would happen. Okay. So I'm going to give you my troll scenario afterwards. So he put up it was 20 milligrams of sulfur dioxide in a balloon. And I was joking with my friend Dominic Marama, the gentleman who made the newspaper articles, graphics on weather modification history. I've now combined weathermodificationhistory.com and climateviewer.com together. So they're just one website, all of it in one spot. It's very condensed, much easier to read. So it's all on climateviewer.com. Just go to climateviewer.com/interactive-timeline. Anyway, so I was joking with Dominic. I said, 20 milligrams. That's funny because I just took 200 milligrams of ibuprofen. So we're not talking about a lot of sulfur dioxide to begin with. And he actually did 3 different release parties. He now has a YouTube channel. I don't know if you know that, but his YouTube channel's rather funny.
Is this where he releases balloons? He has people releasing balloons?
Yeah, his little balloon parties, and they're releasing little rubber balloons that aren't going into the stratosphere. But regardless, he filled out this NOAA Form 17-4. That actually comes from the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972. It came as a result of weather warfare in Vietnam, Operation Popeye. Wow. So the United States has the only law in the books is if you're going to modify the weather, you have to inform NOAA. And there is no, it's not a contract or anything like that, You
clarified that. You could, because I was saying contract. It's not.
Yeah.
What's shocking to me is I could go out there just like Eisman did and say, I'm going to go put this stuff in the stratosphere, and there's nobody watching the hen.
There's no approval process.
No,
either. There's nothing.
It's insane.
It's insane that since 1972, when that law was passed, and the forms were made, and they're available all on a website. I pulled up forms regularly. I actually mapped out all of the weather modification reports from 2002 through 2012. They're on climateviewer.org. And you can see, who asked for the project, who paid for it, the sponsor, who did the project, how many square miles, how many, grams, kilograms, whatever, what type of chemical they used, square acreage or miles that they did. I've seen projects as large as, 116,000 square miles. But what's ironic about all this is he just filled out a initial report. There's actually another report called an interim and final report. Mm-hmm. So in his initial report, he wrote 2023 to 2223.
200 years.
Purpose, cooling Earth. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm sitting in the NOAA office and I get this, looks like a 6th grader wrote it, and I'm going to be real with you.
Looks like a high school application is what it looks like.
No, it's so bad. My daughter, now don't get me wrong. My daughter's in private school. I have 2 daughters, but my 7-year-old daughter can write cursive.
Yeah.
And she has better handwriting than this thing. This is an official government form. It's embarrassing. What's ironic about it is that paper was never for geoengineering. Mm-hmm. And before him, the only other person, individual, not government, not, large corporation, that has ever attempted geoengineering was a guy by the name of Russ George. And he did the Haida Salmon Restoration Project. And when he did that, he was doing what was called ocean iron fertilization.
Oh, yeah.
So OIF, he was dumping iron into the ocean to increase phytoplankton blooms. And he specifically, because I interviewed him about this and I talked to him publicly on Twitter. And I said, at least with what you're doing, you're not poisoning a bunch of people. So if there is any kind of geoengineering project, I probably wouldn't have a problem with growing phytoplankton, which like produces most of the air we breathe on the planet, isn't a bad idea. But he did it because the island that they were living on had been so overfished by international fishing mega corporations that there were no fish there. So he was dumping iron to make phytoplankton to try to bring the fish back.
Wow.
But because ocean iron fertilization is a geoengineering technique, the whole world collectively gasped and then labeled him a rogue geoengineer, the world's first rogue geoengineer.
Right.
That would make Luke Eisman the second.
That's right. So as you know, we have identified Make Sunsets as the first we're going to be going after for our lawsuit, which I announced. And again, we could go after the ASTM, and their standards. We could go after NATO.
Good luck with NATO.
Exactly, right. So we're starting small. We're trying to get the lower hanging fruit. This is absolutely ridiculous. This application they've already released over 22 balloons. They have no idea what they're doing. There's no measurements. There's no standards. There's no testing. There's none that going. They're just releasing them and letting them go. It's not they're not like they're observing it and improving their methodology. They're just doing it. And so we're starting with them. But my hope is that this will actually create a lot of awareness that people have no idea that when you go to the Department of Commerce or to NOAA, there's this application where there's hundreds and hundreds of these geoengineering type of applicants, whether it's an energy company or a research company or corporation or university. There's hundreds and hundreds of these. It's just crazy. So now what it looks to me like we have to do is once we go after Make Sunsets, which is a smaller fish in a big pond, but it looks to me like really what we have to address, of course, is the jet fuel itself.
Well, let me before you say that, I'm all for making an example out of putting the dunce cap on this guy and dunking on him, because it's one thing for Mexico to ban geoengineering.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. Okay. Right. The Convention for Biological Diversity banned outdoor geoengineering experiments in 2010. Right. It means nothing.
Yeah.
In fact, just to be clarify, the United States did not sign that agreement.
No, they did not.
So the United States could care less about the CBD 2010 agreement to not do that. They don't care about the solar geoengineering non-use agreement. They don't care about the Hands Off Mother Earth, NGOs, 110 civil societies, saying no to geoengineering. They have plowed ahead with funding this, the National Science Foundation, individual philanthropers, because at the end of the day, whether you're Democrat or Republican, whether you're independent, it doesn't matter, because both sides agree on one thing, and that is the status quo. So how do we continue to virtue signal that we are going green while continuing the status quo? Oh, there's this Band-Aid called geoengineering solar radiation modification where it could, as they put it, buy us some time to transition. Now, the stupidity of this is, the reality of the situation is we're going to need at least 50 to probably 75 years to fully transition away from oil. I refuse to call it fossil fuel. That's a whole nother argument. But to get off of oil and gas in the next 50 years is nearly impossible. Even Elon Musk, who builds electric cars and arguably has been the most successful EV inventor on the planet, has stated repeatedly, we cannot transition that fast and we need more fuel.
Well, I've been arguing this for some time. And my whole my whole segue into environmentalism was through the peak oil, peak oil theory and so on, which I no longer believe, and the fossil fuels, where it's more like abiotic fuels and so on. But even though we were talking about fossil fuels and so on, whatever you want to call them, I've been saying to folks, like, look at you guys. I don't think you understand. I know we want to transition out, and I would like for us to transition out. I'm not really too keen on solar and wind and so on, because really, when you look at the cradle to grave calculations, nobody ever does that.
Right.
It's like really, how much is it?
What are the real environmental costs of solar energy?
Throwing it away, and nobody ever gives that to you ever. I'm like, well, then you might be committing Jevon's paradox, which is you're making matters worse by trying to make them better, unless you do the cradle to grave calculation.
Right.
And so ultimately, I'm like, you guys, I don't think you understand. Think of how long we have been dependent upon oil, fuels, how long it's taken us to build that infrastructure. From the manufacturing to the pipelines, to the gas pumps, to the automobiles, the vehicles, the planes, the train, blah, blah. I'm like, do you understand that all of that stuff has to transition with it? The infrastructure itself is not just a matter of, just change out the oil. It's like you've got to change out everything, the whole entire infrastructure, which, by the way, you need a cradle to grave calculation on.
But you gotta think about it from the elitist, the illuminated ones from on high who have billions of dollars. They don't care.
No,
because as we saw in Paris, when Emmanuel Macron created the yellow vest movement by jacking up the price of fuel to try to keep people from using it, they burnt the city to the ground.
Right.
The problem is these policies affect poor people disproportionately.
100%.
I happen to be one of those poor people. So when it's costing me $75, a week, no, it's costing me right now $90 a week to put fuel in 2 different vehicles per week. Now that disproportionately affects poor people, okay? And they don't care. They're going to make it as painful as possible because it does not affect them. They're still going to get in their private jet and fly to Davos and pontificate about and bloviate about the beauties of green energy and how we need to reach net zero and set climate clocks.
Right.
While ignoring the ongoing geoengineering from what? Jet fuel.
Right.
And the people that are working on the next generation aviation transportation systems, they're saying, well, we'll transition to hydrogen until we can get batteries light enough to make electric planes.
I would never trust that. I would never trust a battery.
I mean, right. How soon? They're going to have to be flying at least 10 years before I get on one. But at least then I won't get aerotoxic syndrome from all the burning fuel oils and barium and smoke events that happen in the cabins. I get sick every time I fly, not to mention the radiation up there. But let's get back on topic. The geoengineering is going to continue to occur. The whitening of the sky is going to continue to occur for a very long time into the future because their timelines and their fear porn don't match up.
Right.
So this climate clock that has a 6-year date set on it, which would be 2029, right before Agenda 2030.
Right.
They're not going to be able to meet that deadline either. So is that the deadline where, Biden's solar radiation modification becomes more of a plausible, okay, we've really hit the, what's hit the fan. So it's time to do real geoengineering and, roll out the military planes to just dump chemicals. I don't know. That's the part that scares me. The more people believe that the climate is going to die, the more likely they are to ask their government to save them.
That's right.
And I'll leave you with this last thought about this. Just last month, a new chemical process was discovered in the atmosphere. Hydroxide forms on water droplets in the sky. And hydroxide not only can remove pollution naturally, the earth healing itself through natural processes, Not only does hydroxide remove pollutants from the air, it removes greenhouse gases from the air. So if we simply left it, I said this 10 years ago, and the guy who emailed me when this thing literally got published, he's like, dude, you've been saying this for 10 years, man. And they have proven today that what you said was true. And I was like, this is just common sense.
Okay, so this is planet Earth's own system just healing itself.
Of course, it is a self-sustaining.
Right.
It is a almost living, breathing organism.
Well, no, it is a living, breathing, it is a living, breathing organism.
I don't doubt it.
Well, it's too dynamic for me to think it's anything but. And I have said this, is that if you want to heal the planet, you've got to give it some space. You've got to give the room
time to rest.
And whenever we have allowed certain, rivers or certain oceans or certain islands or certain meadows time to come back, and you don't interrupt them, they come back. The balance comes back rather fast. So there's an irony here. I have a question for you. One of the things they're going to do, and they're already starting this, is to remove commercial airlines altogether, right? They want to just completely decrease it for us little guys, right? But ironically, wouldn't that be a great thing? I want to be able to fly. But wouldn't that be actually a good thing?
I think so. Yes. Like I personally have an aversion to flying. So I said, about roughly almost 10 years ago now, airlines, you're hashtag grounded. And it's a double entendre. It's just like I would tell my children, you've been behaving badly, you're grounded. Well, airline industry, you've been behaving badly, you should be grounded. The problem is that without a complete moratorium on cloud seeding, the weather modification projects, which involve everything from orographic to hygroscopic flares, the types of cloud seeding projects they have, where they either do it from ground-based or from aerial. Now they're using ionization methods. The United Arab Emirates Rainfall Enhancement Program is using drones that are solar powered with ionizers on them so that they can modify the weather 24/7. Without pausing all of that.
Right, I get that.
And we won't ever know what natural weather even looks like.
I know, and I've said that too. I'm like, we're like now a generation or so into never seeing actual real natural weather, and that blows people's minds. They can't believe that, but that's how long the manipulation's been going on. So, okay, so with the whole climate change boondoggle, there has definitely been an attempt now to absolutely decrease, if not completely eradicate, commercial airlines. Do I like that idea? Personally, yes, no. I mean, better for the planet, but yeah, it's nice to fly when you need to, wherever. But to save the planet, okay. So that's probably going to be happening anyway because they're forcing that issue. So then if we can have people like us focusing on the geoengineering aspect, starting with make sunsets, then we can actually start addressing the actual geoengineering programs, correct?
I think originally with my Environmental Modification Accountability Act, my goal was to give the geoengineers a chance and say, look, as long as you give us, let's throw a number out there, 2 years. If you tell us 2 years in advance, you're going to do this small scale study, then as long as you're public and you're transparent and honest about it, I'd feel more comfortable. Right. With any weather modification project, when anybody says they're going to cloud seed, they should give at least a minimum 48-hour public notice on a website and or in a local newspaper, local news, so that people are aware and they can see at this time they're going to be dumping their chemicals in this storm cloud. And if this storm cloud floods my neighborhood, I'm suing your ass.
That's just it. And that's why they don't want the transparency, because you'll start to see a pattern. So that's funny. You just seeded and we got flooded out. Oh, you seeded again and we got flooded out. I mean, that's why they don't want you to know, because you'll start to see the patterns. Right.
So the problem I see with this is now, I always try to reevaluate at least yearly, long held beliefs. And my long held belief was that if I got transparency and verification, so if I got transparency from them And then I had verification regime, sensors to detect rainfall samples, reported in real time. Then we could have some kind of bargaining chip. I'm now switching with geoengineering more towards the solar geoengineering non-use agreement, but I'm making a different argument because I believe that the Oppenheimer argument is probably where I land now. Oppenheimer, which just coincidentally releases today in theaters, he created the atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project, and then famously said, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," from the Bhagavad Gita, Hindu scripture. Everybody's probably already seen that, that interview. The point that if you listen to the entire interview, the lead up to that famous quote is he says, well, it was our hope as a scientific community that many lives could be saved by ending the war if we built the bomb. So you hear the exact same words coming out of David Keith when he says, many tens of thousands of people will die directly as a result of geoengineering, but it is our hope that many more would be saved. Right. The problem with this is, just like with Oppenheimer, once you build that technology, once you allow the research to occur to build the technology, you can never put the genie back in Pandora's box. Right. So my Oppenheimer argument against geoengineering research is that solar geoengineering research should be banned forevermore. Now, their counter argument is, well, what if we inevitably need it and then some country just decides to go about it without having done the research? So we should do the research to know how dangerous it is, but we already have done enough research to know there's at least 27 good reasons not to do it. And the biggest one being, who the hell would you trust with the thermostat of the planet? Because that takes all control and gives it to a small group of technocrats, scientists, bureaucrats, unelected officials. It should be ended forevermore. This should be a no-fly zone for research. That's the only way to prevent an inevitability of geoengineering deployment. We already have geoengineering with airplanes, military planes, commercial,
ship tracks.
We need to stop that. We need to stop the weather modification projects. People are going to want water. They're going to be really pissed off that you're stopping them from sprinkling chemicals in clouds to make it rain in their neighborhood. But if we focused all of that energy on desalination plants and not killing all of the ocean life while sucking in that salt water and turning it into drink.
To be honest, really, the thing that's most amazing to me is, like, when I was running for governor in California, one of the things I learned from it's called the the Soil Sponge Collective, group of amazing permaculture women and so on, and they build topsoil, is that if we focus on rebuilding our topsoil, we change the weather. It actually brings in rain, brings in the rain clouds, right? It brings in the rain. Then when it hits that incredible living soil, it actually absorbs the water and puts it back and recharges the aquifer, rather than the water, the rain hitting soil
it and running off into the ocean.
Exactly. So that's what's happening right now. So when I hear people talking about climate change, I say to them, do not talk to me about climate change until you talk to me about rebuilding our topsoil. Rebuilding our topsoil is probably the most singular, best thing we can do for the whole entire planet. Because it's not just the rain and bringing the weather, but then you have nutritionally dense food you're growing. You bring back diversity. You bring back the pollinators. You actually focus on the soil.
And the same thing is true of trees. So with the soil, the thing that you're specifically talking about is the abundance of a bacteria called Pseudomonas syringae. And it is the #1 natural cloud seed on the planet. Well, I would give it a close tie with trees. So Jasper Kirkby from CERN did the Cloud Project, Cosmics Leaving Outdoor Droplets. And he put a coniferous plant's dust, a pine tree, and some water vapor with a little static from some galactic cosmic rays in a cloud chamber and created a cloud and rain. And he came to the conclusion that rainforests create their own rain because trees create the seeds that draw the moisture that make the rain. They literally make their own climate.
Isn't that
is the beauty? He said, even if you don't believe in God, if you believe in Gaia, the hypothesis, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that our natural ecosystems literally rejuvenate and can take care of themselves. The problem is humans don't live harmoniously with nature. They seek to control everything, whether it's land resources, water resources, or even the weather.
I know, and we're really, really bad.
We really are bad at it.
We're bad at it. So we're going to end it on that. And I just want to say that this has been another beautiful, enlightening conversation. And really, what's interesting is maybe we need to fly less throughout the skies and really focus more on the soil, right? Give nature, give Earth the time to heal herself, right? Just calm down, everyone. Stay put. Go local. Stop buying stuff from China so you don't have the big ships coming over spewing stuff everywhere.
That's right.
Stop buying stuff from Amazon where they're flying this stuff in. Like, really, like, what if we all took an oath for the next year? I'm going to go local. I'm going to do everything local. I'm not going to buy stuff from China. We just do that, and then we see what
you're resonating with me, because I literally was on Quite Frankly's quitefrankly.tv with my friend Frank, and he asked me, he's like, what's the solution, Jim? And I said, they were called victory gardens in World War II.
Right.
And the idea is to decentralize everything.
That's right.
The more you believe in globalism, the more you become reliant on powers that are far distant and prone to failure.
And prone to abuse.
Right. So in a perfect world, just like with a decentralized internet, it takes away the power for governments and corporations to censor you, right, because my content is streamed across 100,000 different computers. Right. It's impossible to take them down, but if it's on a single server, you can direct denial of service, distributed right. denial of service, knock that thing out. Right. The same is true is if we decentralize the food system, the medical system, industries, every industry, your state should be able to create 80%. And that's the number I would put it at. 80% of what's necessary for people to live right. within the state. Now, right. of course, there's always going to be things like, rare earth metals, or there's always going to be something you just don't have locally.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah. So buying local, buying American made, producing American made, right? Not being dependent upon this system that's way over there, the global system, right? Focusing on the soil, focusing on your local food, ironically, is the answer to saving our skies and saving our planet.
It's the only thing that can. In fact, that's, a small group of dedicated individuals is the only thing that ever made a difference. That's right. So what we have to do is be that group that goes out and advocates, for those, local farm stands, for those local food co-ops, right. and says, you know what, I may be paying a little bit more, but I'm getting a much higher quality product. Right. That I know the person that grew it. That's right. And I know that that's not feasible for people who live in the dense part of New York City. I understand this, but if you continue this, running to these very large cities to chase these lucrative jobs, mm-hmm. then mega cities 2050 is what the globalists want. All of us in these huge mega camp cities, where they have total technocratic control, spying on everything you do, and can literally, lock the door like in Batman to where right. nobody can get off the island.
That's right.
So yeah, it reminds me of a song going viral right now. Try that in a small town.
Oh, yes. Well, Jim, we were ready to have our little interview here, and we're like, what are we going to talk about? I'm like, let's just wing it. We'll figure out. We'll have something to talk about. And I've not been disappointed. So I just want to say thank you so very much. And what really excites me is that in a nutshell, the conversation we're having and we're wrapping up with is that while we're looking at people like, me or you or someone going out there and stopping the geoengineering and this and that, what's fascinating is the power is in our hands to actually stop it. And that is to go local. That is to go American made and to be less dependent upon that centralized system that is taking advantage of us, that is abusing us, and that does not give a rat's ass about our longevity, our health, or our well-being. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Jim. Always enlightening. And whatever you say, I become a human foghorn, and I try to share and spread the word. And let me tell you, we're getting our on the ground crews ready. We're starting to pump that up and get going on that for our lawsuit to get people out there at the farmers markets, at the intersections and overpasses and at events to educate people. And what's going to be so different about this is we're not going to be sitting there going, oh, it's all about a lawsuit. It's like, no. This is what's really going on. And this is what you really can do to clean your skies is you take the power back into your own
hand. This is the year, if you have not seen the groundswell of activism of people voting with their dollars.
Yeah.
Whether it be Bud Light, Target, the list goes on.
That's right.
People are starting to finally realize the power they have with their monetary and energy by moving their feet and making their voices heard.
That's right.
The best thing you can do is, since you mentioned foghorn, is start small. And my rooster in my backyard is a big white rooster named Foghorn Leghorn. And we have our own chickens and we get eggs regularly from them. And we just had 7 little baby chickens. My wife is going to be doing herbs and mushrooms, and we're going to get some livestock, start small, but we have a small, maybe I'd say 7 acres of land total, and we're going to turn it into our own homestead.
There you go. And yeah, I mean, and you're right. And people, that's the answer right there. And so I think what's really exciting is there's a lot of people out there who are waking up to geoengineering, and they're floored to find out, like, look, it's the jet fuel. It's this, as you're saying, they're, our commercial aircraft or the cloud makers. But when it comes back to how you use your dollar, what you purchase, what you buy, what you focus on with your dollars. So this is actually very, very empowering, and most people don't feel empowered.
I want to leave you with one last thought, because I was actually part of a national health lobbying group's Zoom call earlier today, and at it was a prominent, geoengineering activist, along with a bunch of other individuals. And it amazes me that in this group of so-called enlightened people, that even to this day, after 15 years of me trying to, tell everybody, here's what geoengineers say, here's where the chemicals actually come from. You want to know about aluminum and barium? Here's where it is. Like, I can prove this in a court of law. That people are clueless. You have to, like, I have to start over this conversation 100 times a day when I'm talking to people, and it becomes very tiring. You have to, like, detach yourself for a little while, take a breather, take a mental break, and then go back at it. Mm-hmm. But I think eventually people are going to realize that after 8-10 years of them being interested in a thing and hearing nothing new, mm-hmm. that when you finally get to the end of the rabbit hole, and then you realize, wait, not only is what he's saying, verifiable, but, like, I can go test this my damn self at a local airport.
Yeah.
Like, you can go get somebody who's got a private jet, tell them to put some Jet A in there, and then put the sensors behind just the engine.
Yeah.
You don't have to fly up there, and you can verify it yourself. And if people could realize that, then we could actually make a dent in this airline industry, destroying our weather, destroying our climate. They are the greenhouse. They are the geoengineering.
Wow.
I just wish that people could wake up to that.
Well, I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
I applaud you guys because, you know, most people don't even try.
I know.
And
Well,
that's just the truth. They don't even try.
I know. But when I look at the honeybees, when I look at the hummingbirds, when I look at the children, I'm just like, really? We're gonna let the earth fall on our watch? I'm like, it's not gonna happen. Not on my watch. So Jim Lee, we're gonna have to do this another time. And
I appreciate it.
I'm really so grateful for you. Thank you so much for who you are. I'm really, really grateful for you. And thank you for laying it out so clearly.
Well, I definitely had fun with this impromptu conversation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right, folks. Jim Lee, climateviewer.com or .org, weather modification history. Check him out. He's amazing. I mean, where else have you ever gotten this information on geoengineering? Jim Lee, eternally grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everyone. Keep looking up. Take care.
If this video resonates with you, leave me a comment because I love hearing from y'all. First time here, be sure to subscribe and click the bell. Yeah! Remember, it would be impossible for me to do this without your support, so please join my Patreon or buy me a coffee on PayPal. And always, attack ideas, not people.